These are 8 mistakes I still see people teaching today. I still see real estate agents using some of these things that I think is causing them to struggle more than they need to. And so these are the 8 cold calling mistakes that are simply outdated that you should stop doing immediately. The last one on my list, I think, will shock you a bit. So let's jump into this right away. Number 1 is cold calling. Now, here's what I mean by this. You might say, well, what do you mean? Should I stop cold calling? Not necessarily. What I mean by the advice to cold call is what's being suggested that a real estate agent like you or I go into some cold neighborhood, pick up the phone and start calling random people. You know, they might call this circle prospecting. Well, there's a better way to direct outbound prospecting. And what I recommend that has served me and served the agents that I coach so much better than just calling random homeowners, hoping and praying that you find one that potentially is looking to sell a house. Why not? The definition of prospecting is to proactively initiate conversation with a targeted list of people. I mean, that's the definition of it. So instead of just calling random people, I think that's pretty outdated. Why not get a targeted list, a targeted niche, a targeted demographic of people that we know already have an interest in selling their home? Wouldn't that make more sense? Like, I mean, if you're going to spend an hour or two calling people, you have option A, call random people. You have no idea if they're ever going to look to move. Well, that's one option. The other option, option B, is to spend the same time only calling people that you already know want to move. Wouldn't that make a lot more sense? And so instead of just cold calling people, let's use direct outbound phone prospecting with people that we already know the likelihood of them having a need for what it is that we do as real estate agents already be in existence, because our job is not to convince people to sell their house. Our job is to get in front of people that have already decided to sell their house. Number 2 on the list, being overly enthusiastic. There is just so many people make this mistake, and quite frankly, I made this for a long time. Calling a prospect and, the prospect picks up the phone. Hey, Bob, this is Brandon from Billy Bob's Real Estate. How's it going today? And so overly enthusiastic. The reason why that hurts you, it raises sales resistance or psychological reactance immediately. I mean, immediately, because the only people that talk like that with that overly enthusiastic tonality without having a relationship has to be a telemarketer, because they think if I can be overly enthusiastic and have this whole big positive attitude that somehow it's going to get the prospect to be nicer to me. Well, it does the exact opposite. It's a dead nuts giveaway that you are a telemarketer and you've got something to sell, and I regret picking up the phone, and how do I get out of this phone call as soon as I possibly can? That's what it actually does. So what we have to do is be more curious. What we have to do is be calm. What we have to do is mirror and match the tonality and the pace to which the prospect is communicating, and that is how you're going to have better conversations. Number 3 is saying, how are you today? Okay, again, this is another thing that I see a lot of people making outbound calls doing that is a massive, massive mistake, because again, without having the true rapport with a prospect over the phone, to ask a question like that comes across maybe disingenuous. And so, I mean, the only people that do that are people that they have relationships with, which you do not. And so it comes across as you not being authentic. A fake, how are you doing today, in hopes that you're going to break into a conversation, is the opposite of a pattern interrupt. There's a better way to open up that phone call in a way that will build real rapport. And real rapport allows you to earn respect that will allow you to have a better conversation with the prospect when you call them out of the blue. Number 4, hitting start on your dialer at 8 a.m. Now, you might say, well, what do you mean? Are you saying not to start prospecting first thing in the morning at 8 a.m.? No, I'm not. But here's what I am saying. If you think about this is a big mistake. Let's just say you're using a lead source like a RedX or like a Vulcan 7 or a Mojo, just as an example. Well, number 1, isn't it fair to say that so is all of your competitors? That's number 1. Number 2, isn't it also fair that they are getting the same list of prospects that you're getting? So if there's 2 agents agents in the same market, and they're both on, let's just call it Vulcan 7, and they're both getting their expired listing leads from Vulcan 7. They're both getting the same list, and if they both hit start at the same time in the same list, they'll be calling the same prospects at the same time. Now, multiply that by 100 or 1,000 of agents in your market doing the exact same thing. How effective is everybody calling the same prospect at the same time, using the same system, using the same number? It's not very effective. So what should you do instead? Well, what I coach to and what I have done in my own sales practice is kind of go sniper mode. So I'm getting the data from Vulcan 7, but what I'm doing, if I'm going to call leads like a for sale by owner or an expired listing that have high urgency, you got to call them immediately, right? Instead of just hitting start, because the way the data came through Vulcan 7 is organized in a way that everybody gets the same data organized the same way. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to sort through the data prior to my prospecting session, and I'm going to go reach out. I'm going to call the ones that to me have the highest likelihood of conversion for me. So that might be a specific neighborhood, a specific price point. There's other factors that go into that too. And so if I'm getting 15 expired listings in that day, instead of calling the first one like everybody else is doing, I might hand dial some ones that are further down the list that I think have a higher likelihood to convert, and I will be able to be that first voice while everybody's hitting start on the dialer going after the same list. I'll be ahead of the game. Hopefully that makes sense. Number 5, forcing the conversation without permission. So this is what I was saying before. When you get into a conversation or when you make an outbound prospecting phone call and the prospect answers and it's Bob, and you say, Bob, how's it going today? Bob, let's be real. You think Bob is sitting around waiting to talk to a real estate agent and just sitting by the phone? I don't think so. And so what we have to do is we have to actually have a pattern interrupt in order to pique the prospect's curiosity, to pique the prospect's interest, to earn the right to have the conversation. Otherwise, I'm sure you're experiencing it right now. Prospects just say, I'm not interested. Take me off your list. Click. I bet you that happens a lot to you watching this video. So what do we do to make sure that that stops happening? Well, if we get the prospect's permission to have the conversation up front, the likelihood to have a better conversation increases dramatically. And the way in which we do this is by lowering reactance. And we've talked about that a lot on the channel, but reactance is when somebody feels as though their ability to make their own decisions are being taken away. And when that happens to somebody pushes back, says, no, I don't even care. When they feel that pressure, they push back. So what we have to do is lower, or in other words, remove the psychological reactance. How we do that is by giving up the perception of control and giving it to the prospect. So the prospect feels as though they're making their own decision. The best way to do this is by approaching the conversation like this. You say, Mr. Prospect, listen, this is Brandon. I'm a realtor. And before you hang up, I was just hoping to tell you why I called really quick. And then you can decide if we need to have this conversation or not. Would that be fair? And when you do that, the prospect isn't used to having this new sense of control on a conversation. And so they don't even know that this is happening. They're not calculating this thought. It's just a natural psychological response where they say, well, sure. It's like asking somebody the question, can I ask you a question? And what do they say every single time? They say yes. It's a universal yes. And so when you approach the conversation this way, you're going to find that the conversations go longer, that you're able to ask more questions, that they engage more. And so because not only did you lower reactance, but the other benefit of opening a call like this is you get to benefit the principle of consistency. This is another thing that psychologists have found to be very useful is when someone verbalizes a commitment, they behave to stay consistent with that decision. Next, number 6, trying to get an email from everyone you talk to. This is a massive mistake. Why? Because what I see happening is real estate salespeople trying to force every single prospect that they talk to in their database. And what ends up happening is they grow this huge email list of prospects when their real intention was to generate leads. And they end up getting into the data collection business instead of the selling of real estate business. And I don't know about you, but collecting email addresses doesn't pay very well. And so I understand the mindset, but the problem is it's a scarcity mindset. The scarcity mindset says, I'm going to try to get something out of every single conversation that I have versus how do I have a high quality conversation, maybe I'm generating a lot less leads over the phone, but the leads I do generate actually convert into listing appointments and then into listing, because the agent that's trying to convert everybody ends up working or generating information from people that are not looking to sell their house for years into the future when there's business to be had right now. So instead of trying to convert everybody, the thing that has served me that I coach to is, why not you be skeptical of every prospect like they are of you? So what does this mean? This means asking good qualifying questions to determine, is this a lead or am I forcing this person to my database for some reason? Because collecting email addresses is not the business that we're in. Number 7, trying to close the sale over the phone. This is another mistake that I see a lot of people really struggle with, and that is, we call a prospect out of the blue. We have our first conversation, and somehow we think that we can use a magic script to get them to agree to list their house over the phone on the first call. Well, I mean, again, all that is doing is raising resistance. It is so unlikely for you to call a prospect completely random, out of the blue, convince them with some magic words that all of a sudden they're going to say, yeah, I'll list my house with you tonight. I mean, it's so unlikely. What's more likely is for them to say, nope, not interested. I'm good. Nope. Just resist. And I know this because if you look at your conversions, if you're making 100 calls a day, not all 100 are saying, come list my house, are they? No, what we have to do is we have to break up the sales process into small, easy, micro commitments for the prospect. In other words, phone is designed to set appointments face to face. And that is how we position the conversation. You can't list a house without having first some type of listing appointment, whether that be over Zoom or in person face to face. So why not spend the time over the phone, focus on selling that interaction first? It's got to come first anyway. We can't skip over that anyway. So that is the approach. We use the phone to set appointments. We use the appointment to convert into listings. Number 8 on the list is the one that you've been waiting for. Using scripts to get people to say yes. Now you're like, Brandon, I don't get it. Isn't that the whole goal, is to get people to say yes to whatever it is that we're pitching over the phone? Well, not necessarily. So the way in which I see most scripts written and most scripts taught is by asking questions that hopefully will solicit the prospect's agreement with a yes. Now, the problem with that is, prospects don't owe us anything. And so over the phone, they have their defenses up. And so it is very difficult to get, unless you get really good and your skills grow, it's difficult for people to get prospects to be agreeable. What they aren't used to doing, and what I am suggesting that you do, is you don't do this with every question, but what we want to do is reframe the type of question that we're asking to get agreement by getting the prospect to say no. And so the reason why this is so effective is the way you can ask a question, instead of saying to the prospect, hey, are you still interested in selling your house? All right. It's a bad question. It is so easy for the prospect to not agree with that because they feel threatened. They feel like you're trying to sell them. A better way to ask that question to get agreement by getting them to say no would be something like this. Mr. Prospect, would you be totally against the idea of reviewing an offer if the numbers made sense? And them saying, well, no, I'm not totally against that, is their way to agree to the question. So try to ask what we call no-oriented questions. And I think what you're going to find is that more and more prospects agree with you. So if you want help with any of this stuff, before you leave, I'm going to put a link underneath this video. And if you want to have a conversation about potentially working together, learning about our Listing Agent Academy coaching program so that we can help you build a multiple 6-figure listing agent business, click the link. You can schedule a day and time that works best for you. We can have a conversation, explore the idea of working together. And then at the end of that, we can both decide if working together at this time makes sense or not. So click the link beneath this video, and I'll see you guys in another video very soon.